Hello, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Fun and busy show on tap for you to hear today. It's Jake Fromm later on. Always love having Jake part of the program. It's Connor Riley there as well. A lot to discuss with Connor. Some of that discussion will be based on stuff we talk about here today. From the NFL Scouting Combine, a couple former Georgia offensive linemen have a very interesting preview of the next Georgia offensive line in 2023. I think this is an important conversation because how Georgia reconstructs its offensive line, I believe, is going to go a long way towards determining whether or not it really is able to go for 3 in 23. We will talk about that then. But off the top of the program, how about a quarterback discussion? And how about some evidence that maybe some of the folks on the far outside of the program, such as some writers from ESPN, they may not be fully aware of exactly what is possible to happen for Georgia starting this spring. Maybe a little bit of a mystery, maybe a little bit of a surprise in store for some of the national media folks in terms of how it's all going to play out here for Georgia. I think this is a fun discussion. We'll lay it out for you when we talk about how quarterback evolves for the Dogs in a post-Stetson Bennett world. That is what's on the way next. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
As you know, spring practice for the Georgia Bulldogs begins next week, and obviously when that starts, both here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia and other places, the quarterback discussion, who is the next in line to be Georgia starter after Stetson Bennett led the Dogs to 2 national championships, that is going to be a very hot topic. And we have some evidence here today, which I think is kind of interesting, that maybe some folks far on the outside of the program, maybe they don't quite have a full handle on exactly what is at least possible to play out when this competition begins and when it unfolds over the course of the next few months. And you know this, that sometimes I like to go outside what I call the bubble of Dog Nation and kind of get a perspective from, like, say, 10,000 feet or however you want to describe that, because sometimes by all of us who sort of zoom in so close microscopically at times on what's happening at UGA, maybe that gives us a distorted picture. But sometimes you have people who kind of live far on the outside of all of this, and maybe they're just not following it as closely as we are. It's actually that distance that creates a distorted picture for them. And I think we have a little bit of evidence of that today. Connor Riley wrote a story about this at DawgNation.com. I'm going to talk to Connor more about the general takeaway on this a little bit later on. But ESPN does one of those kind of capsule stories where they look at the top spring storylines for their top 25 teams or whatever else, and you're probably not surprised necessarily to find out that for ESPN, that top spring storyline for Georgia kind of centers around quarterback. I want to read you, though, just a short portion of what a duo of writers, Chris Lowe and Harry Lyles Jr., said about the Georgia situation, and I think you'll see some evidence that, they may not be fully aware of exactly what's going on here. Can we show this on the screen here from ESPN? Chris Lowe, Harry Lyles Jr. saying this of Georgia, that when it comes to quarterback spot, redshirt junior Carson Beck and redshirt sophomore Brock Vandagriff appear to be in line to compete for Bennett's old gig with the opportunity to lead Georgia's bid for a three-peat, or as we say around here, to go for 3 in 23. Now, when you read that from Chris Lowe and Harry Lyles Jr. from ESPN, there is one name conspicuously absent from that little blurb there. We heard Carson Beck, and we do believe that Beck is a big-time contender for this quarterback job. Obviously, he was the number 2 quarterback a year ago. We heard Brock Vandagriff, and there is a lot to like about Vandagriff. His athleticism is, I think, quite prodigious. This is a guy that I think moves around pretty well, has a big arm. He kind of looks like a quarterback. You'd obviously love the idea of a guy like this being a part of your quarterback competition. But who didn't get mentioned there on that little ESPN blurb at ESPN.com? I didn't read Gunnar Stockton's name in that. Did you notice that? Stockton's name wasn't there. That's interesting to me. Now, this also, I think, kind of reflects some of what you see in some of the betting odds right now, and there is nothing more notoriously wrong this time of year than early futures on the Heisman Trophy. I think it's been a million years and probably never since one of the top favorites for the Heisman Trophy at this point in the year ended up winning the award. So I don't know that current Heisman odds are all that predictive of anything necessarily, but when you look at some of the online sports books like FanDuel and places like that, that have posted these Heisman odds. You see odds for Carson Beck and you see odds for Brock Vandagriff, and both those guys are relatively short shots to win the award. The thought being, well, you had a Heisman finalist at Georgia a year ago in Stetson Bennett. Whoever emerges as the starting quarterback at a place like Georgia, which could and will be predicted to win the national championship again, clearly the Georgia quarterback is likely a Heisman contender. That's why you see kind of the short status, almost like a favorite status for potential Georgia quarterbacks right now. But once again, when you look at these Heisman odds, it sort of reflects what the ESPN guys are saying here, which is it's either Carson Beck, who's been the number 2, Brock Vandagriff, who was the number 3 and kind of been here a little bit. Once again, there seems to be a certain pocket of the national media that I don't think is as aware as it should be about Gunnar Stockton. I truly believe that when Georgia spring practice begins next week, in a competition that I believe that will last several months, probably into the start of the 2023 season, I truly believe it is a 3-man race. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying on all of this. I am not predicting that Gunnar Stockton is going to be the starting quarterback at Georgia. That's not my prediction. I am sending a warning shot, though, to all national media types that if you only focus on Carson Beck and if you only focus on Brock Vandagriff, you are not giving the full picture of exactly what could happen for Georgia in its quarterback competition this offseason. Gunnar Stockton should be taken very seriously for his chance to win this job. Part of this is because Stockton has traveled at Georgia a very, very similar path to what Stetson Bennett traveled, and obviously we know how that turned out for Bennett. That Bennett originally made a name for himself at Georgia in 2017, working as the scout team quarterback for a team that played for a national championship. You know how much praise Bennett earned for that. What was it? You had like Mel Tucker and McCole Hardman, a lot of guys around the program at the time that were like just sort of just boasting about how good Stetson Bennett had been as the scout team quarterback. Now, the Bennett route to becoming Georgia starter was a little bit, is it circuitous? Is that how you say that word, circuitous? You know, he had to go to junior college, then he was buried on the bench, but eventually, obviously, we know how it all turned out for him. In the case of Stockton, it could be a little bit more of a direct route. He got some really important snaps at practice this past season against the defense. It's a pretty good proving ground. It'll let you know how good of a quarterback you have a chance to be. The experience you gain from that, I think, gives you some pretty good seasoning here, and I think you have to take him seriously because of that. Now, once again, that's not to say that Brock Vandagriff couldn't beat out Gunnar Stockton. It's not to say that Carson Beck won't beat out Gunnar Stockton. But you better take Gunnar Stockton seriously in all of this. In fact, to bolster my point, let me let you hear from Kirby Smart, going back to when Stockton first signed with Georgia. Now, keep this in mind. At one point in time, Gunnar had been a South Carolina commit. Gunnar was one of those guys that basically could have gone everywhere, but he came to UGA, and he followed up on a good bit of quarterback depth at the time to come to the Dogs. But apparently Gunnar wasn't, shy about any of that. And obviously when he signed with Georgia as a part of that class of 2022, Kirby had plenty of good things to say about him at the time, and those words then, I think, resonate now. This is Kirby talking about Gunnar Stockton.
The recruitment of Gunnar was really interesting because we've known Gunnar, or at least I've known Gunnar since he was a small kid. His dad hosted me at a official visit at Georgia Southern many years ago, so I've known his dad for a long time. My dad was the high school coach there as Gunnar was a young kid. Tremendous athlete, tremendous character. I don't know that you could raise a finer young man in today's day and age of all the, I don't know what you call it, the attention-seeking people. He's never done that, and he's stuck to his guns that he loves UGA and that he wants to be here, and certainly a major part of our signing class.
Now let me ask you a question for a quick moment. Does that sound like a guy right there who could be the Georgia starting quarterback? I'd say that it does. Now, the retort to this is, well, yeah, BA, you could play clips, though, of Kirby Smart talking about Carson Beck, and he'd say good things about him, and you're right about that. And you could play clips of Kirby Smart talking about Brock Vandagriff. In the past, he said plenty of good things about Brock. Totally understand that. I'm not telling you that Gunnar Stockton is the favorite, and I'm right now not talking about Carson Beck and Brock Vandagriff. We're talking about Gunnar Stockton because ESPN wasn't. And we're talking about Gunnar Stockton because, preseason Heisman odds or these sort of betting markets that try to project who starting quarterbacks are going to be, they're not really saying much about Stockton right now either. All of that could turn out to be a mistake. Maybe the Georgia quarterback competition is just as conventional as some people think it will be. Carson Beck was the number 2 a year ago. Maybe he just ascends to be number 1 right now. Or if he doesn't win the job, maybe it's a former 5-star like Brock Vandagriff, who to a lot of folks kind of outside the bubble of DawgNation on the national landscape. A guy like Vandergrift may be more famous to them than Stockton is simply because Vandergrift was rated higher as a recruit. Maybe it's that conventional wisdom there as well, that the highest rated former recruit on this quarterback roster, he emerges as the starter. Maybe it is that simple. But in a place like Georgia where competition really matters, finding a way to make the competition as intense as possible is typically the way you expect Kirby Smart to go. And it's probably the way that Mike Bobo, the new offensive coordinator, is going to go there as well. And in a very intense competition that includes 3 names, I'd take the name of Gunnar Stockton pretty seriously. At the very least, he makes the competition more interesting, and I'd give him a shot to win it. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we're glad to have you with us no matter how you join us today. Live on video, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. On the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref and across all the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, worldfamous.DawgNation.com, every other place you can kind of connect with this show, just whichever platform you choose. We just really appreciate you being a part of what we're doing here each and every day. And a huge, huge thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it possible there as well. You know, so many of the folks in our audience, homeowners, you want to take good care of your home and you want to try to protect your home when bad stuff happens. And one of the worst things that can happen is the kind of stuff that Engineered Solutions of Georgia sort of steps up and fights against, protects against, tries to, handle each and every day. I'm talking about foundation waterproofing issues. You know what the foundation stuff is? That concrete floor in your basement, maybe, those walls, you see those cracks start to emerge. You kind of know what that looks like. Just, the rigid cracks show up and you realize, this could be a sign of something. Well, if that's the case, don't put off finding out exactly what's going on, because sometimes it's tempting to want to kind of pretend it doesn't exist, but nothing is made better by avoiding the conversation. And the great news is, at a place like Engineered Solutions of Georgia, the conversation may be more pleasant than you realize, because Engineered Solutions of Georgia has the word solutions right there in its name. It is a solutions-based company. That means if there's a simple fix for your problem, they're going to tell you that. But if it's something that requires a little bit more substantial work, all the more reason to have ESOG on the job, because they've got an entire team of engineers on staff to help you. There's nobody in our market that puts that level of resource to work for you the way that Engineered Solutions of Georgia does each and every day. Same thing for waterproofing issues too. That water creeping in where it's not supposed to be, basement, crawl space, wherever else. Once again, trust Engineered Solutions of Georgia for your foundation, your waterproofing issues. They're longtime friends of ours at DawgNation Daily. I'm so grateful for that. They're also proud partners of UGA too, and it's always fun to do business with those that support the Dogs, and that is exactly what Engineered Solutions of Georgia does. So give them a call. 678-ESOG now. That is 678-ESOG now, and that will get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, coming up in a couple of moments, I've got a really fun contest opportunity that we're going to do here at DawgNation, a great giveaway. I'm very excited about that. I'll tell you about that in a couple of minutes. That's going to be fun. Also, before we're done in today's show, Jake Fromm stops by. Always great to talk to the former Georgia quarterback, and in light of our quarterback conversation off the top, we'll ask Jake about Gunnar and Carson Beck and Brock Vandegrift and exactly how he thinks this quarterback competition could play out. That will be good. It's Connor Riley here in a couple of minutes there as well, so we're busy here over the course of the next few minutes. But prior to that, I want to go around the DawgHouse. And, obviously it's not a surprise that a entity network like ESPN fixates on the Georgia quarterback competition this spring. We understand why they will. It is important. It's going to go a long way towards determining whether or not Georgia can go for 3 in 23. But I would suggest that it is not the only very important thing we'll be watching this spring and into the start of the 2023 campaign for Georgia. I don't want to say the Georgia offensive line situation is more important than quarterback, because that doesn't quite seem right, but I think there is a way of looking at offensive line for Georgia being a catalyst for how good the quarterback eventually ends up being and how good the offense eventually ends up being with Mike Bobo at the helm here for his first year back since 2014. And the reason why we know that's true is because look at how much of a catalyst the Georgia offensive line proved to be in both 2021 and 2022 for the back-to-back national champions. We have a little bit of track record that suggests this the case. So with guys like Warren McClendon and Broderick Jones leaving, a guy like Cedric Von Granger thankfully coming back, looking at an offensive line in transition and kind of how it, reconstructs itself here a little bit, I think is going to be really important. And one of the guys that's going to get a real opportunity, it would seem, this spring, earned some praise at the NFL Scouting Combine this past week. Both Broderick Jones and Warren McClendon really zeroing in on what they think Ernest Green, former elite recruit out of the state of California, what he has a chance to be this year. Kind of battle entry here a little bit, but when Broderick Jones was asked directly who he thought would replace him this year on the Georgia offensive line, Broderick Jones was pretty quick to mention Ernest Green. This is what Brod said about that.
Probably my guy Ernest. I like Ernest a lot. He was hurt this past season, but I believe when he's back healthy and he gets everything in order, he'll be all right.
Who's your toughest matchup last season?
Toughest matchup last season?
So I probably didn't edit that clip as sharply as I could have, but you get the point there. Kind of shortened the point when it comes to Ernest Green as being the guy that can sort of step up and take the place of Broderick Jones. Later on, Jones was asked a little bit more about exactly why he liked Ernest Green so much, and hopefully I edited this clip a little bit better. Let's listen and see.
Ernest he came in, I felt like coming in, he was ready. He was very physical, heavy hands, good pass sets, good run blocker, good finisher. He showed all the attributes it takes to play at a level at the SEC.
How did that compare to where you were at when you came in? And how would you compare Ernest's level of preparedness to where you were at?
I feel like, being honest, I feel like he came in, on a higher level than I did, just because he had, experience like his dad with his dad, trainers. Like coming out of high school, I really wasn't training with, a lot of people. So I feel like he really had an upper level of game than me coming in.
So thankfully, I edited that clip pretty well. And I got to tell you, that's really exciting. Now think about what we just heard from Broderick Jones there for a moment. And a lot of times in these discussions, guys are sort of throwing around these platitudes. Maybe it doesn't mean as much as you might want it to mean. But nonetheless, I'm going to take this pretty seriously here for a second. Broderick Jones just gave Georgia an awesome level of play at the left tackle spot this past year. He's going to be a first-round pick for his efforts. He deserves that money. He's going to get it. I'm glad he is. But he says, hey, Ernest Green actually showed up at Georgia a little bit more ready to play than I was. And I like that because, if you're a Georgia fan, you need a big year from Ernest Green. You sort of expect to get a big year from Marius Mims, and obviously he showed you a high level at the end of last season. You're sort of saying, well, the next big guy in line would seem to be Green, but we didn't hear a ton about Ernest this past year. He was banged up and probably took some of the spotlight off of him, and maybe I'm just speculating here, maybe it slowed his development a little bit too because he kind of dealt with some injury stuff. So while you're sort of left to assume, well, Green must be the guy just based on kind of his rating and based on some of the chatter you've sort of heard about him, you're still kind of viewing him as a little bit of a mystery. But Broderick Jones gives you a very high level of praise there because of some of the personal training he gotten and kind of some of the opportunities that he had. He actually showed up at Georgia. Broderick Jones says, a little bit more polished than I was. I really like that. And when you take what Broderick Jones says there and echo it a little bit with what Warren McClendon also said about Ernest Green, I think you start to feel better about another high-level tackle emerging, knowing that Georgia's losing two very high-level tackles off last year's team. Here is Warren McClendon on maybe the next in line there, Ernest Green, the former four-star out of California.
Ernest Green, he got injured throughout the season, before the season, so he sat out for a little bit, but he's coming back. He had a great spring, especially for early enrollee. He shocked me, so Ernest Green for sure.
What did Ernest do in the spring, like you said, that shocked you and really made you think, hey, he's a guy who can come in and play pretty quick?
Really, when freshmen come in, early enrollees at that, they have a lot to learn, and he picked up on everything quick, and his pass pro, you come in and you have to learn how to kick slide and stuff like that, and he had it down pat, day one when he first got in. So just seeing stuff like that and just little things like that, you're like, okay, he's gonna be good.
Let me give you a little bit of a hint about how I listen to things when it comes to press conference stuff like that. As I said before, it is like sort of college football media 101 that if a player is at the scouting combine, you ask him about the guys that are still left over at a place like Georgia, and we know these guys aren't going to trash their former teammates, right? So they're going to sort of throw around some nice praise, and you can decide for yourself how much that means. When I hear the same specific praise, like the same specific comment from two different people, well, I'm likely to take that seriously. And what Broderick Jones said is, hey, I'm a first-round pick, but this guy actually came to Georgia a little bit more prepared than I was. And when Warren McClendon says, I was shocked by his level of preparation, the level of polish his game already had, even as a true freshman kind of going through spring practice for the first time, that's the same compliment from two different guys. I'm left to take that seriously. And I'm left to believe, well, in that particular case, hey, maybe Ernest Green, this guy that you need to have a good year for you, maybe he is actually set up to do that. I take that as very good news, and I take that pretty seriously. And by the way, just for fun, one more here from Warren McClendon on the other tackle, Amarius Mims, who actually played in place of Warren during the college football playoff and the rest of the offensive line. I liked this from Warren about his outlook for that group this upcoming year. And once again, if you're a Dog fan, I believe you're going to like it too.
They're going to be a beast. They're going to be a machine. Hopefully, they win the Joe Moore, but we all know how that goes. But, they're going to be a dominant group. Oh yeah.
What about Mims? He was kind of your understudy. Where do you think we're going to see Amarius Mims?
I don't know what position he's going to play, but I think he'll play, a big role in the leadership. Really, there's going to be a lot of leaders. A lot of older guys, Xavier Truss, Cedric, Tate. Mims stepping up. It's going to be a lot of leadership in that room. So, yeah, it's going to be a good room.
So I like all of that from McClendon. I love the kind of sarcastic disregard at the end of, hey, hopefully they'll win the Joe Moore Award, but you know how that goes. It's almost like Georgia's just sort of giving up. Like Michigan's going to win the award every year for the rest of life, even though the Georgia offensive line dominates on the way to every national championship. I think that's really funny. And my expectation is that Amarius Mims is going to be one of the best players in the country here this year. I do say that when you see how well Broderick Jones played a year ago, if you kind of think of whether it's left side, right side, just sort of think about, kind of slotting the player types here. If Mims is this year's Broderick Jones, I do think you got a lot to live up to be as good as Broderick Jones was for Georgia a year ago, but Mims could very well do it. But I take it, man, that's pretty exciting. To hear those things about Ernest Green, the sort of specific praise, specific compliment from both guys, I take that pretty seriously. So that's a nice thing to be able to see. Before I bring on Connor Riley, speaking of Georgia offensive linemen, how about a really fun opportunity to win, courtesy of DawgNation and our friends at Marlowe's Tavern? What a great giveaway this is going to be. It involves me, which I'm excited about, but what I'm more excited about is it also involves the former Georgia offensive lineman John Stinchcomb there as well. What I'm telling you is, and if you go to DawgNation.com, right there, top of the page, you can see the link to click into to read more about this and get the information that you need. But we're going to do a VIP Marlowe's Insider Lunch with me, but more importantly, John Stinchcomb. It's coming up on March 21st. It's a Tuesday, March 21st. You can be a part of this at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody. That's 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. We've been to Marlowe's in Dunwoody a million times. We always love it. It's going to be a great day coming up on Tuesday, March 21st, and you're going to have a chance to win this. We're going to have 4 winners who get a chance to win. Bring a guest there to be a part of that day. Me, John Stinchcomb, what a great time it's going to be. You go to DawgNation.com and click on the link for your chance to win, to register for that chance to win. Entries, of course, got to be coming in here pretty soon, so let's make sure we get those in there. But DawgNation.com for your chance to enter to win a VIP Insider Lunch. Me, John Stinchcomb, kind of giving you all the insight you need about how Georgia's going to be this spring. That's going to be a great time. I hope you'll register. I hope you'll good luck in winning that. 4 winners, bringing a guest for that. It's going to be a great time. Can't wait to hopefully see you for our VIP Insider Lunch at Marlowe's Tavern in Dunwoody coming up on Tuesday, March 21st. That's a great time. Speaking of great times, we're going to have one later on, bringing on Jake Fromm to the show. We'll talk to him about everything happening around UGA, but let's keep this conversation going right now. Always a fun guest on a Tuesday. How about Connor Riley right now at DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Glad to be talking to Connor Riley here on a day like this, and obviously Connor had great coverage of the NFL Scouting Combine. I want to talk about some of that throughout our discussion here, but Connor, let me let you join in on what I was just saying. I heard the same specific compliment from both Warren McClendon and Broderick Jones given Ernest Green during some of the press conference stuff. I take that pretty seriously. We know that players say nice things with the former players in a situation like this, but when it's the specific compliment, I take that with some comfort and some, certainly some optimism, because I think the Georgia offensive line is a huge question going into the spring. I think you need a guy like Ernest Green to be able to step up for you. Obviously, he kind of dealt with some injury stuff last year, but based on what Brod and Warren said about Ernest Green, I think if you're a UGA fan, I think you're rightful to be pretty excited about what you might see for him as a likely starter at offensive tackle, either left side or right side, but a likely starter for you at offensive tackle this year. I thought that was pretty good stuff from the two former Georgia tackles this past week. What did you make of it?
Having read what you just laid out and having heard the quotes from Broderick and Warren, I'm actually going to caution against maybe some of the optimism there. I'm not certain he's going to be 100% ready to go, cleared this spring, a full participant in spring practice. They're, I think, going to be cautious in bringing him back from his back injury there. And, look, Georgia's going to have a lot of options at that offensive tackle spot. And while, yes, Ernest Green is the highest profile of those guys, Austin Blasky's a guy that's been in the system for a long time. Xavier Truss is a guy that has started at left tackle before. Monroe Freeling is a guy that I think has a chance to come in and push. So I'll be interested in seeing, the bill of health that Ernest Green gets. I'm a little skeptical that he's going to be the full participant that some people seem to think he's going to be. And so with that in mind, you do have to pump the brakes a little bit, but it's worth remembering, and this is, I think, maybe the most reassuring thing that Warren and Broderick said. Everything that they came out and said was what we had all thought last spring, watching him sort of be that number 2 left tackle in spring practice, especially after Amarius Mims entered the transfer portal and was not with the team during spring practice. You really liked what you saw from Ernest Green, the early development, how well he did early on in his time at Georgia. It was all really encouraging. I think with a back injury, anytime you have something like that, especially at someone at that size, you're going to be cautious, and it's going to be a little concerning in terms of, how quickly does he get back onto the field and what might that lead to there. And so, if you're telling me that Ernest has a clean bill of health for fall practice and there's no concerns about this back injury or re-aggravating it, yeah, I absolutely share in the enthusiasm that Broderick and Warren have. But for spring practice, I just can't quite go there yet.
Yeah, and so I'm fine with that. I think the larger thing for me is not how healthy he is for spring, but whether or not he's actually a good player. We know he's a good prospect, and as you said, he showed some flashes last spring. I take the words of both Jones and McClendon pretty seriously, though, that when healthy, he's a good player. And I guess that's more important to me. And I don't want to make it seem like it's nothing that he's battling injury. And if if that injury battle lasts into this calendar year, well, obviously that's not maybe great news. But given the great Georgia players that we've seen that didn't participate in spring practice at all, I'm not really quite so sure that caused me to feel one way or another about Green in this situation. I'm just glad to hear that he really might be the kind of player that's somewhat equal to his recruiting ranking, because that's exactly what Georgia needs for him to be by the time you get to September, October, November.
Right, and it's worth pointing out as well here that offensive line class that they had signed. Look, Jacob Hood has already transferred out. We'll see what happens with Aluba there. It was not necessarily a Georgia offensive line recruiting group that I think was of the standard of past recruiting hauls. I think the 2023 signing haul is significantly better in terms of the depth and the level of players that they bring in there. And so Ernest Green, it was a big win just to get him as a prospect in terms of what you thought you might potentially get in him. And then to see him so quickly prove that to be correct, I think was a really encouraging sign for his development. We'll see what kind of football shape he gets into this spring. I think that's probably the more important thing there, and what sort of development path he takes going forward. But, if Austin Blasky's your first team left tackle for G-Day, don't be surprised there. But I think overall, when you hear Warren and you hear Broderick speak so highly of where he is early in his career, he's able to overcome this back injury and get into football shape, in fall camp. It's going to be very difficult imagining somebody else being that starting left tackle against Tennessee Martin to start the season.
I don't want to spend the whole time talking offensive line, but when you mentioned a guy like Blasky, isn't he going to be the backup center, though? Can you play tackle and center?
I think you can. He's going to be the sixth offensive lineman. He's going to be the guy that, if there is someone injured, they're going to bring him in and move him around. They also have Jared Wilson at center there as well, someone they're trying to develop into a center there. We'll see what they end up doing. Warren Erickson was someone who was a backup center on the 2021 team, and they started him at right guard for 14 games that season. And so, and yes, obviously guard and tackle are a little bit different, but they feel comfortable what they have in Blasky as a tackle option there as well.
I talked about quarterback before you joined us. I think this competition is going to be really fun. I think it's going to be the kind of thing that we have a good time with all throughout the spring. And I'm guessing the competition may also extend into the season there as well, and maybe that's the most fair thing to all three of these guys who are going through it. But for me, as I said before you joined us, Connor, this is a three-guy race to me, a three-man race to me, and it seems like whether it be preseason Heisman odds that kind of seem to only know about Beck or Vandegrift, or maybe the ESPN write-up that I know that you did a story about at DawgNation.com, I don't know that folks 10,000 feet above DawgNation, 3,000 miles from DawgNation, I don't know that they know how much of a factor in this competition that I believe that Gunnar Stockton can be. It's not my prediction that Gunnar Stockton will win it. I don't have a prediction about who's going to win this competition there as of yet. But I do believe that Gunnar Stockton needs to be taken very seriously, and I don't get the impression that everybody in the national media knows that right now. What is your early read on this quarterback situation?
I think you nailed it right there. Gunnar Stockton is absolutely a name to know, and is a guy that's if right now on March 7th, I think Carson Beck's going to be your starting quarterback against Tennessee Martin. But what the Georgia coaching staff is going to want to see, they're going to want to see Carson go out there and win this job. They want to see him be the best. They don't want to hand it to him as a default. And Gunnar Stockton's not going to let that happen. He's not going to, let it be, it's just a rollover. Let's just go with Carson. He's the most experienced guy. Gunnar Stockton is a guy who, look, the reason he is not the national media darling, he didn't do a lot of recruiting camps. The only sort of real exposure he got his senior season in terms of a recruiting thing was the All-American Bowl at the end of the year there. And so his recruiting ranking dipped a little bit. But you watch this guy play, you talk to people who see him at practice, you hear Kirby Smart talk about it after the national championship game. The guy's a gamer. He does some of the things, I think, in terms of similarities to Stetson Bennett, he is the most similar in terms of play style to Stetson. And look, we've talked a lot about, and there's going to be a lot of talk about what this offense looks like going forward. I think they're going to try and keep this as similar as possible. And so with Gunnar Stockton, I think having a lot of the similar traits that Stetson Bennett showed and had in his time at Georgia, I think you see the potential fit there, along with the fact that, Mike Bobo knows Gunnar Stockton better than any of these quarterbacks. He recruited Stockton when he was at South Carolina, got him to commit when he was the offensive coordinator at South Carolina. His dad, George Bobo, has worked with Gunnar Stockton for a long time. There's a lot of familiarity there with Gunnar Stockton. And if Gunnar Stockton is your starting quarterback, it's because Mike Bobo feels that he is the best fit for this offense and what it's able to do. And I absolutely believe that he is talented enough and good enough to lead this Georgia offense to where it needs to go.
I believe that sports fans sort of speak in the language of comparisons. How does this thing remind us of another thing that's happened in sports before? And I think a lot of folks are trying to kind of decide, hey, what will the 2023 quarterback competition, which year from Kirby's past will this be the most like? And for me, I'm guessing we're going to see a lot of echoes in 2017 in all of this, where Jacob Eason had started some in 2016, but Jake Fromm, who ironically will join us in a few minutes here, Jake Fromm was taken very seriously that offseason, even though he was fresh out of high school. And this is not a perfect replica of what you have in 2023, but I think it's some of the same kind of stuff where maybe Carson Beck is sort of the Jacob Eason from the standpoint that he's been the number 2, he's been here longest. But we heard a lot back in 2017 of Jake Fromm pushing for competition. I believe we're going to hear some of that this spring, this summer, of whether it be a Vandegrift or whether it be a Stockton. They are making their push, and they are making this a real competition. And I believe that Kirby will use the word competition a lot in a way that he'd kind of gotten away from the last, couple of years. Stetson last year, obviously. JT going into the 2021 year. Kirby was sort of treating his guys a little bit more of an established starter than maybe he had years prior to that. I think we kind of get back to sort of old school Kirby on this, where I think Kirby used the word competition a lot. And, no disrespect to Carson, he may win it, but I do not believe he's going to be treated as an heir apparent at all.
See, I actually maybe think it's maybe a little bit more like the 2018 quarterback competition, and we can throw competition in air quotes there. Again, I think Carson's going to end up being the guy, but you're going to hear, talented guys in Brock Vandegrift and Gunnar Stockton pushing, but at the same point in time, you wonder, and especially looking back in hindsight on that 2018 competition, how much of that was just like lip service and trying to placate those other quarterbacks? Because, and I do believe that there is some of that going on with this quarterback competition because of the fact that with the advent of the transfer portal, Georgia does not want to be in a position where they only have 2 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster. And you saw that play out in 2019 where, like, Jake Fromm's not an unbelievable athlete. He's not what Anthony Richardson is. But he is certainly, I think, a more capable runner than he showed that season. But Georgia was so worried about him getting hurt and taking extra hits that they essentially wiped that out of the playbook and didn't want him even so much as scrambling to pick up extra yardage there and open himself up to extra hits. And so you wonder if they're playing out this idea that it's a competition and they're giving everyone a fair chance. But deep down, they feel pretty confident in what they have in Carson, and they know he's going to be the starter. And while, yes, there'll be questions and rumblings throughout the season, and maybe even, especially early on in certain games where Georgia's a big favorite, you do see guys like Brock Vandagriff come in for a series or two. You do see Gunnar Stockton come in for a series or two. But when they know they need a guy to make a play, they're going to rely on Carson Beck. And I don't expect it to be the, drama that it was in that 2018 season, because just none of those guys were the same level of prospect and had the same level of hype attached to them as Justin Fields did. But I wouldn't be surprised if it has a sort of macro sense similar feel to it.
We will see about that. Obviously, NFL Scouting Combine was this past week. We had a lot of good coverage of this at DawgNation.com. Kind of the thing that I said yesterday about it is I'm just amazed at how much what happened this year echoed for Georgia what happened a year ago, because when you watched all that play out leading to last year's NFL draft, you're sort of left to feel as a Georgia fan of, gosh, my team will never be on top of the world the way that it is right now, winning the national championship, kind of dominating the NFL draft. And yet, lo and behold, there is a very clear path again for Georgia to once again have 5 first-round picks. Maybe it doesn't all work out that way, but you can certainly see how Georgia gets 5 again. And I just think it's incredibly fun to see Darnell and Broderick Jones and Nolan Smith and even, some of the guys, kind of down the conversation a little bit, even a guy like Stetson Bennett in terms of what he did at the quarterback spot. I just thought it was really fun to follow these Georgia guys this weekend. What was your overall takeaway about what you saw?
Nolan Smith backed up everything I believe he was in a football player. There was some question of whether or not he was even going to work out at the Combine, given, he suffered a torn pectoral muscle at the end of October. And the fact that he goes out there, runs a 4.3 940, which would have been a great time if he were like a defensive back or a wide receiver. I know Nolan is going to be a very good and disruptive edge player. I kind of wonder, seeing him do what he did at that size, like, could you have seen him more on offense and use him in that kind of role?
Wow.
Just with the raw athleticism that he had there, a 41.5-inch vertical jump, 8 inches taller than George Pickens, who is sort of a freak athlete in that sense. You think of that there. Darnell Washington, I thought, if he could run in the 4.7s, that'd be a great time for him. He goes out, he runs a 4.64. You see him just own the blocking side. A guy who I think, one of the things that has maybe been a little bit under-discussed when it comes to him, yes, he's a great athlete, and yes, there are going to be questions about how productive can he be given he was playing behind Brock Bowers in college. I think this is a guy, and I covered his recruitment. I was there the night he committed to Georgia. I was with him at the end of our All-American game. You never want to say any of these guys, but I've been really impressed with the maturity that Darnell Washington has displayed and shown and grown over the course of his career. And so to see him take these steps and become better and become more mature and grow into the player and the person that he has as he's entering the NFL, it's a really cool thing to see. Because, again, we cover and we talk about these guys starting as high schoolers, 16, 17 years old. And so to see them grow into who they've become now and on the precipice of coming into life-changing money, it's cool to see that development, not just from an athletic standpoint, but from a personal standpoint as well.
Yeah, I had a chance to talk to him a couple of times kind of leading into the national championship, some of the stuff in the college football playoff. I enjoyed every one of those conversations. This was a very mature, a guy. I didn't really know him at the beginning of his college career. I just know at the end of his college career, this is a very mature guy who was very willing to be a part of a team concept at Georgia. He wasn't featured at UGA the way he might be other places. I think he was pivotal for the Georgia offensive success. And if you can get this guy paid at a first-round level, to me, that's a huge, huge boost for UGA, because it gives you a great proof of concept for all kinds of things in the future of, hey, come here, dedicate yourself to team the way that Darnell Washington did, and you can be a very rich man because of that. Boy, that's a real engine to give Kirby Smart a chance to be exactly the kind of coach he wants to be.
Right, because Darnell's a very different, 5-star prospect in terms of when he came in. Because some of these guys, a Nolan Smith, a Keely Ringo, exactly what they're going to be when they get here, and it's easy, and it's easy track of development for them to follow. Darnell Washington was a 5-star athlete simply because he was just so, such a unicorn in terms of his body type. But There were questions about how he's going to translate. There were questions about, should he move to offensive tackle. For him to have the development that he did at that tight end position, shows not just for tight ends in particular, but I think you can extrapolate that to other positions on the field and show, hey, like, we have a development plan here for each and every one of these guys that come in. And if you buy into what we're doing, it's going to impress NFL teams. You're going to make a lot of money for yourself. And sure, you may not have the production that you want to have, but you're going to become an elite athlete. You're going to become, for the most part, a pretty solid all-around person. And you're going to be able to impress NFL teams buying into the team concept. And, oh, by the way, you're probably going to win a national championship or two in your time here as well.
Fun to talk to you, Connor. Great to read you at DawgNation.com. We'll look forward to doing it all again very soon.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, it's a great week. It's a fun time in the NFL Scouting Combine. You love to see Georgia being such a big part of that and continuing again for a second straight year after what happened back at the conclusion of the 2021 season. It's just awesome to see. Something else that's awesome to see, those days counting down along the way until we are on board our second ever cruise with DawgNation coming up this April. It's Independence of the Seas. We're leaving out of Port Canaveral. We're going to Nassau in the Bahamas. Perfect day, Coco Cay. And we've invited you to be a part of it. So many of you are going to be there. We have a big NFL draft party coming up on the final night of that cruise. It's just going to be an awesome time. And I want you to call my friend Jessica Slater, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can talk to her about the DawgNation cruise. There may be a slot left or two. I mean, what you run into eventually is just the whole ship sold out, so you kind of run out of that space. I know we've got a huge turnout for this. There may be still a chance for you to sneak in there, but you got to do it quick because it's getting booked up fast. And then you can go to royaldogs.com to sort of read more about that. But also I want you to talk to Jessica about all the other great stuff going on when it comes to Royal Caribbean. I was just on Wonder of the Seas, largest cruise ship in the world, that big 7-night vacation we had there on that. If you're watching video, you see a little bit of images from Icon of the Seas. This is a ship that's debuting January of 2024 going out of Miami. And it's just another example of how Royal Caribbean completely redefines the cruise vacation, kind of pushing the limit on everything with every new ship they introduce and all the ways in which they keep amplifying and kind of taking the ships they have and making them even more fun. We just love that about Royal Caribbean, and Jessica can tell you all about it, so make sure you reach out to her today. She's got you covered on all of that. Before I bring on Jake Fromm, let me get you covered on everything else happening around the SEC, starting with a team soon to be in the SEC. As Texas gets started with its spring practice, the discussion of quarterback comes up there. Arch Manning fresh on campus at a high school. Quinn Ewers, seemingly the established starter. But Steve Sarkisian is speaking the language of competition about what's going to happen there. And I am fine with telling you this, that the way in which Sarkisian talks about his quarterback spot there in Texas, I have no problem with that as a template for how Georgia could do the same thing when it comes to its quarterback situation. Because with all due respect to Carson Beck, who could win the Heisman Trophy this year, it is not impossible that a guy like Beck emerges and wins the Heisman Trophy. That is not a crazy thing, given the fact that he's occupying a spot that also went to, a Heisman finalist a year ago, if he indeed emerges as a starter. The fact of the matter, though, is that Quinn Ewers has proven some stuff during games as a Texas starter, and yet he is not being considered the shoe-in automatic starter for Texas this year. Arch Manning's being watched closely during spring practice and during the offseason. And I believe for guys like Brock Vandagriff and, as we mentioned earlier, Gunnar Stockton, who've been here, I think they deserve their chance there as well. And if they make their push and ultimately Carson Beck wins this job, good. He'll be better for that. The kind of extra spice you get because of what a Vandagriff or a Stockton does, if Beck, who was the number 2 and the likely favorite to win this job, if he does truly emerge the way he always was, then he's made better because of that. But Vandagriff and Stockton deserve their chance here at Georgia, just like Steve Sarkisian says he's giving a chance to Arch Manning right now. Now, maybe yours because of the experience. Maybe he wins. Maybe Beck because of his different kind of experience, but more experience than the other two. Maybe he wins as well. But this is the right year for a competition, and I believe it's going to be a fun one to watch play out. Speaking of competition, Florida could use all the competition it can get, and frankly, it hopes to be more competitive in the SEC this year. The one thing it will not have to aid its competitive efforts, though, is a whole lot in the way of continuity. A lot of coaching turnover from Florida here right now. A lot of guys leaving the Gators to go on to the NFL. One of those we talked about the other day was William Peagler, the tight ends coach, who goes and becomes one of, I think, 3 former Florida assistants to take jobs at the Arizona Cardinals. It's kind of a weird anomaly. Well, Billy Napier has announced his replacement for Piegler. It's Russ Callaway, a guy who had been a quality control analyst staffer with the Florida program. You know, you remember, I wish I had the picture to show you, but do you remember that team picture for Florida at the beginning of last year where it's like they had their players and like around them there were more analysts than players? So I guess the good news for Billy Napier is if you lose a lot of coaches, you at least have a lot of those quality control guys waiting in the wings to potentially take over. In the case of Russ Callaway, that's what he's going to do. Now, y'all know I'm a Gator hater. Y'all know I'm not particularly objective when it comes to these kinds of things. But as objective as I know how to be, the one thing that I'd be very, very concerned about if I was a Florida fan is the lack of continuity kind of first year to second year for Billy Napier. I'd be worried about that. And frankly, I feel the same way about a completely different college situation. You see some of the same kind of stuff going on with Mario Cristobal at Miami. They may have made good hires as replacements there. But when you have that kind of like 1 year to second year changeover and you don't have a lot of continuity with your coaching staff, you're left to ask questions about, well, why is this and what does it mean? And it sort of speaks to those first 12 months on the job for Napier where you don't really have a big tangible thing to hang your hat on. You know, Kirby Smart in his second year had the number 3 recruiting class in the country. You know, they made the SEC championship. They won the league. They made the college football playoff. In year one, you know, beat a top 10 ranked Auburn team as a double-digit underdog. You know, right now, other than, I guess, beating Utah, I guess, which doesn't count for much down here in SEC country, you know, Florida just doesn't have much to show for year one. And now year two, where they have to have a huge step up in play, they're doing so without a lot of experience returning on their coaching staff. I think that's tricky. Now, listen, there's also some analytics stuff out there if you care about the math nerd thing. There are also some analytics stuff out there that suggests Florida could be a turnaround team here this year. So it's not impossible to think that Florida plays better, overcoming right now what seems to be kind of a meager quarterback competition, some holes along the offensive line, and just sort of a lack of overall energy enthusiasm around the program. Some of the math guys will tell you they give Florida a shot here this year to be much better, maybe even find a way to 10 wins in a way they didn't a year ago and haven't in quite some time. So you got to take them at least a little bit seriously for the possibility of a turnaround on the basis of some of that statistical stuff. But overall, there's just not a lot going on at Florida right now, and a fresh crop of coaches who no one's ever heard of are going to be tasked with trying to change that here this year. I guess good luck to them as they do that. By the way, speaking of kind of scheduling stuff and things like that, one of the year one surprises in the SEC was what Brian Kelly was able to do at LSU, winning the SEC West, beating Alabama, and maybe Kelly also getting a little bit of an offseason win against Nick Saban and Alabama there too. We told you yesterday about some of the stuff going into the weekend, Nick Saban whining about what he sort of felt like the Alabama permanent opponents are going to be. You're seeing more and more of this kind of stuff leaked out here. Alabama finding out that it's going to play Auburn, Tennessee, LSU on a yearly basis. Saban wasn't too happy about that. Brian Kelly asked about the situation of playing Alabama every year, took a very different tack with his answer, saying, I came to the SEC because I wanted to play the very best games, the biggest games against the best opponents. So Kelly embracing this right now in a way that Nick Saban's not. I think it makes certainly Kelly look a lot more flattering than Saban's, I'll call it, whining made him look. And as some have pointed out, why is Nick Saban whining about this anyway, given the fact they've been playing Auburn and Tennessee and LSU each and every year, and they seem to win all of those games most of the time? Why is Nick Saban whining about this now? Could it be that Nick Saban knows in the future he's not likely to have the same kind of team he's had in the past, that maybe he doesn't have one of those kinds of teams this year and isn't set up to have one of those kinds of teams in 2024 when these changes start taking place? It's at least worth considering what the motivation from Nick Saban, or maybe the reason why Saban is saying what he's saying. One more thing I'll add to on this there too. The other chatter coming out of some of the Ross Dellinger reporting on all this, because it's been Dellinger who's kind of been at the forefront of some of these schedule leaks here, is the fact that at one point in time it was thought that South Carolina would be the third of Georgia's permanent opponents to go along with Florida and Auburn. But it sounds like right now there's growing momentum that it might actually be Kentucky for reasons that are more complicated for me to explain. But it could be that Georgia ends up not quite having the third permanent opponent in the new scheduling model that some folks expected it to be, and they could keep their yearly series with Kentucky alive instead. So we'll follow that. We'll kind of tell you where that, what all that turns out to be and where all that goes from here. But for now, we will make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And on a day in which we have talked a lot about quarterbacks, always great to have a former quarterback on the show there as well. How is it going to play out for Georgia this spring? What is to be expected? And all kinds of other fun stuff from the NFL Scouting Combine and everything else. Let's talk to Jake Fromm here right now. We call it a Kroger Fresh Take here on DawgNation Daily. Jake, we always appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us today, and I hope you're doing well.
Hey, Brandon, what's going on? Yes, sir. Happy to be here.
So the thing I said before you joined us is, and I know you know these guys pretty well, is it seems like to me the national media doesn't quite realize now that this quarterback competition that's going to take place at Georgia, there's a chance that Carson Beck could win it, and he could be a great player. We obviously saw the previous Georgia quarterback become a Heisman finalist. Beck could do the same thing. Brock Vandagriff might be able to travel a similar path. But, Jake, I sort of get the impression right now that ESPN people, maybe gambling people, some of those folks out there, I don't think they realize that Gunnar Stockton is also a big part of this competition too. You know these guys. You've kind of hung around with them a little bit. Do you see this as a three-man race to become the starting quarterback for Georgia starting this spring?
Yeah, I definitely do see it as a three-man race. Man, Gunnar is a very sneaky pick here to win this quarterback competition, and Gunnar brings a lot to the table, man. He just kind of brings this tough physical play. He's confident in what he does. He's a leader of men, very smart, and can put the ball wherever he needs to put it. So, man, I really do. I think it's going to be a great competition by all three of these guys. All three of these guys offer just a little bit of a different package, and I think what you're going to kind of see is what is Coach Bobo wanting to do with the offense, and then which skill set best fits what he wants to do in the scheme that they're trying to run.
Well, since you bring that up, let me ask if you don't mind. Let me kind of go through each guy here just for a minute. Give me kind of your snapshot on Carson Beck. What does he bring specifically to this quarterback competition right now?
Yeah, I mean, he brings the arm. He brings the life to this deep play-action attack. Carson's a guy who can make all the throws on the football field. And, you know, as a coordinator, as a play caller, you're not going to be scared to call these deeper shots. And you're going to want to be aggressive because you know you have a guy in the offense who can make all the throws, and a guy who's been around, has experience, has gone in and played in games. And even though it wasn't necessarily the most ideal situation, going in the way he did, up big in games, and still being able to move the offense, get down, and still score points, to me that says a lot.
How about Brock Vandagriff? That's a guy that some of us knew from high school. I like the athleticism, I think, but you know this stuff better than I do. Give me that same kind of description from what you've seen from Brock Vandagriff.
Yeah, so with Brock, I think what you get is a bigger-bodied Stetson, right? You get a guy who can get out of the pocket, make plays with his arm, with his feet, a guy that you get some zone read opportunities. You get into the red zone, design quarterback runs like we saw in the national championship game with Stetson. So with Brock, you kind of get very similar of a same offense, a guy who has an arm as well, can make the same throws. And so, with that, you really kind of get more of what you've seen with maybe and arguably maybe a better athlete.
And how about Gunnar Stockton there as well? You and I have talked about Gunnar before, but what do you kind of see from Gunnar Stockton?
Yeah, I mean, I love Gunnar. See, me and Gunnar, I kind of see a lot of myself in Gunnar. Mm-hmm. A guy who's not going to blow you away necessarily with his arm, a guy who's not going to blow you away with his feet, but a guy who's just going to play good, sound football, who's going to get the offense in the right situations and play good football. He's going to complete balls. He's going to play tough. He's going to play physical, and he's going to play confidently for the offense and move the chains and score points. So. With Gunnar, you get a guy who is really smart, a guy who's going to know this offense, know everything in and out, and always get the offense in the right situation most of the time and make the right play most of the time.
Here's my perception, and it may be very, very wrong. If it is, I want you to tell me. But as a non-former quarterback, when I look in on this trio, to me, it seems like Carson Beck had a very clear, defined role a year ago. He's the backup quarterback, and I'm assuming he practiced like a backup would, ready to step in if Stetson Bennett had gotten hurt. Gunnar Stockton, kind of the same way, had a very clear, defined role. He's the scout team quarterback. We know how valuable those reps were for Stetson Bennett going back 2017. Gunnar's practicing against a great defense every day. That's at least my perception of that. To me, it seems like Brock Vandagriff is the number 3 quarterback, and this is true for any, I think, number 3 quarterback. My perception is there's less clearly a defined role, and so you almost wonder, well, how much of a springboard is that to a chance to be the start of the next year? What does the number 3 quarterback do during practice?
Yeah, for Brock, it's very kind of I wasn't necessarily there all the time. So it's kind of a very back and forth kind of role. It's very tough at times where, you're going to get some reps with the offense to go and run stuff during practice, and then also you'll run over and get some scout team reps and do that as well. So, it's honestly a great point that you bring up. There's not necessarily a clear defined role. You kind of find yourself in limbo a lot of the times at practice. So I think it's going to be a real challenge for him to say, hey, to go out and play confidently and have the confidence to say, hey, this is where I'm at. This is who I want to be. I want to be the starting quarterback here. I want to have a role in this football team.
Do you think it's logistically challenging? And I'm sure Kirby and Bobo will figure this out. But do you think it's logistically challenging to try to split up reps between three guys? Split up snaps maybe even between three guys. Does the presence of a third quarterback, who you do have to take seriously in all this, does that make the division of practice reps more difficult to accomplish? You think?
Yeah, it is tough on the quarterbacks because you just never really feel like you get in a rhythm. Being the guy and getting to go with the ones and roll and just play football. So as a player and a quarterback perspective, it's really tough. But as a Coach Smart and an OC perspective, Coach Smart does not shy away from reps. He loves reps. The more reps he can get in practice, the better he's going to feel about his football team. The more reps on tape they can get, the more they can learn from it. And so, man, for him, it's just an excuse for those guys to get more reps. And so he'll be happy about it. And I promise they'll find plenty of reps and times in practice to be able to get where they want and where they need to be.
I want to ask you about Stetson at the Combine. I thought he had a nice showing before that. Let me remind folks, this is our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here on our program each and every week on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, Kroger's got great opportunities for you to save. I love the way they're always creative using technology to put more money back in your pocket. In fact, you can go digital and save even more with Kroger here right now. You can create an account on the Kroger app or the website and start saving big with exclusive digital coupons. Check out Kroger.com/sign-up for more on that. That's Kroger.com/sign-up for more on that. As I mentioned a moment ago, Jake, I thought that Stetson Bennett had a very impressive performance in the NFL Scouting Combine. It seems like possibly he's going to put himself into a little bit different draft conversation than he might have been prior to that. What did you make of Stetson in Indianapolis this past week?
Yeah, I thought he did really well, ran well, threw the ball well. The only thing that just kind of leaves it up for air, how were the meetings? How did they go?
Yeah.
That's not necessarily something the public's really going to get, from folks, from personnel who were in those meetings to really share. So, from everything that we saw on the field workout, Stetson did nothing but help and improve his draft stock. So happy for him and look forward to see where he's going to end up.
And I want to finish with this. And as a player in the league, you have every right not to answer this question. So if you don't want to, we don't have to. But who would be your QB1? Because to me, you got this situation where guys like Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, they really proved at the college level. I'll take Bryce as an example on this. I believe that's a guy I wouldn't mind seeing, my favorite NFL team build around. I just think that he had some special qualities while he was playing. Better players in college than guys like Will Levis and Anthony Richardson were, but Richardson and Levis have these physical gifts that make them very attractive this time of year. But Jake, for me, I would much rather kind of make my bet on a guy who had production in college and who had won a bunch of games, something that I don't think that Levis or Richardson really did at a high level. As I said before, you have every right not to answer this, but what do you make of some of the quarterback debate that's sort of out there right now?
Yeah, thanks for putting me on the spot here, Brandon. No, you're good. You're good. But in essence, the decision really comes down to, hey, what do we see? What do we know? And then, you kind of take that in one circle, and then over here in this other pile, this other pot, do say, hey, what's the potential? What could they be? And it's always this back and forth battle of, hey, what do I know? How good is he right now? Can he go play and win games for us right now? Or, hey, under the right circumstances and the right situation, what could they be? And then I also will say, now I believe up here in this league, the margin is so minuscule on players and on athletes and skill set. Everybody up here is so dang good at what they do. And there's guys who do little things, a little bit bit better, a little bit different. Obviously, Lamar Jackson's a unicorn. Josh Allen, Pat Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers. I mean, those guys are the unicorns. And then, everybody else here in this pot is just, so dang close, and we're just scrapping and clawing to trying to find a job, trying to find a spot. Man, it is really, really tough.
That's why we like watching on TV. It is good stuff. And, Jake, we love talking to you about it. It is always a fun conversation. Thanks for being here this week, and we'll look forward to getting the chance to do it with you again very soon there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon.
Good stuff from Jake Fromm. And he's right. I mean, the difference between, hey, I'm a 10-year starter and I make, $100 million, or even in some cases more than that, and the guy who, ends up not quite being that, it is not always wide. Sometimes it's just about, take advantage of the chance when it comes your way. And as I said before, that's why the drama's so good on TV. It's why we talk about this stuff every day, because of how intense that competition is. And lots of different ways to kind of go about doing it. We're seeing a handful of different quarterbacks in this draft conversation right now, including Stetson Bennett himself. By the way, Golden Shoe, let's give one of these out. I'm always impressed by how, well-traveled our audience is, including DawgHouse, who checks in from London, to say, while walking around in London today, I saw this car that I thought belonged to the number one UGA fan. Then I realized it was for the ambassador from Uganda, because what the license plate says is one UGA, and instead of UGA, it obviously stands for Uganda. A lot of y'all know the same thing. When you do hashtag UGA on Twitter, it would kind of populate with the Ugandan flag because of, I guess, the World Cup or Olympics, whatever else. So not the first time Uganda has been misunderstood for UGA, but good to see DawgHouse checking in from London. And glad to have him as a part of what we're doing here at DawgNation Daily. Golden Shoe going out there for that. And that is a nice license plate. By the way, speaking of license plate, how about the one that says Gator Hater on the back? And how about 235 days from now, Georgia back in Jacksonville, quite possibly for the last time, beating up on those lousy, stinking Gators. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. I thought Jake Fromm was outstanding on quarterback stuff today. That was really, really good. To be able to go player by player by player on the three guys in this competition. And Jake gave you some specific stuff on all three of those guys. I really liked that. I did indeed. All right, I'm on DawgNation.com, so I don't typically start DawgNation for a cool down. Let me just kind of start here for that today. Let's see what else. Cam Hasty says Uganda hasn't played anybody, which is very funny. Cam, that's very funny for sure. And Uganda also does not have back-to-back national titles. Cam, that is indeed true. Keith Dog says if Vandergriff doesn't start, he's out. I guess so, but, I mean, listen, I just think you've got to be, careful sort of throwing around. I mean, give me the quarterbacks in any order, and I'll tell you that's a possibility of how this could play. I really do. And that's not to disrespect Carson, who, by perception, starts off on top. I'm telling you, this quarterback competition could work out any way imaginable. It could, because we saw a guy, and I'm not trying to give you an overly simplistic point, but this is true. Stetson Bennett went from not practicing at all to leading Georgia to 2 national championships. Like Bennett was buried on the depth chart, given no chance whatsoever, and he ended up being – the guy for Georgia and one of the historic players this program's ever had. So if that just happened, then we at least have to have the possibility alive that anything could happen right now there as well. Anybody could start, anybody could transfer, anybody could whatever. The guy that doesn't start ends up emerging as the starter. Anything is possible here. Anything is possible. Let's see what else. I mean, there's also this, this is just reckless speculation. So, but think about this for a moment. Georgia's obviously got access to NIL. And I'm not saying you're going to pay guys, $8 gazillion, whatever else. But, I mean, you can pay guys to stay. So you can do that if you need to. And, your starting quarterback would certainly seem to be in line to make some NIL money. But if Georgia wanted to pay for a little bit of quarterback depth, see, here's the thing. We talked about Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning a moment ago. A guy like Arch, and I believe that Nico Imaleva may be like this. We may have a lot of former elite recruits who are like this. You may see more guys content not to play than you used to see in college football, because now, well, if you're going to pay me, I don't care if you play me. It's your money. You can use it how you want. I'm not saying Georgia will do that, or there's only so much money to go around, even a place like UGA. We've talked before about how the overall, payroll is going to be a lot smaller around college football than people realize, at least in terms of the NIL engine. But, there are mechanisms you can use to get guys to stay. Let me go to YouTube for a moment. Let's see what else. On YouTube. Frank Patterson says, why does Gunner get all the hometown Georgia love and Brock does not? I mean, Brock's hometown is like 15 minutes from Athens right now. Strange to see why Gunner always seems to get the nod from fans. Do you think that's the case? Because I don't know that I necessarily see it that way. You may be right. I don't know. Michael Carvel says Brock did not grow up in Athens. He moved. But I'm trying to decide, do I think that Gunner is more of a hometown favorite than Brock Vandegrift is? I don't know that I necessarily feel that way. I don't. I'm trying to think, did Gunner play more games on TV than Brock did? I know they played against each other on ESPN that one time. I'd be curious to hear if other Georgia fans think that Gunner's kind of got that hometown vibe more so than Brock does. I don't know that I feel that way. You may be right though. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I don't know that I perceive it that way. Cassie says I think it's Beck's spot to lose, but I think they'll all have to work for their spot. Yeah, I think it's an interesting way to say that, Cassie. Let me plug in on you respond to that. So if it's Beck's spot to lose, that means all things being equal, Beck will be the starter. And I think Carson is going to be asked to win the job emphatically. And if he doesn't win it emphatically, let me not speculate on what would happen if he doesn't. But I think even though he was number 2 quarterback a year ago, this is not a constitutional succession plan. This is not one of those things of, hey, well, according to the constitutional order here, you're the vice president now, you're the president, you're the Speaker of the House, and you're next in line after that. I don't think it quite works out that way. I think Beck is going to be asked to win the job emphatically. And I won't speculate on what Georgia would do in the event that he doesn't, but there are some coaches who would say, hey, if it's somewhat equal here, then you're better off playing the younger quarterback because there's higher upside because of that. Now, I'm not speculating on how Georgia would handle this one way or another, but I do not believe that Carson will be nor should be treated as the likely starter. He may get the first snap of the first practice, the first rep with the number 1 offense, but then after that, you're going to have a pretty stiff competition. Carson may very well win it because everybody says, you see him on video, you see him when he goes in the games, he looks like a quarterback. He looks like he could be very, very good. But I think that Georgia is going to try to use this competition to make him the very best version of himself it can possibly make him. And we'll see how he responds to that. Mike Brown says that Gunner outplayed Brock head-to-head when the two high schools played against each other. I would caution against that one thing, Mike. I felt like that Rabun County back then had way more talent than Prince did. I actually, even in a losing cause that night, I actually came away pretty impressed with Brock Vandegrift. I did. I thought Brock moved around very well. I thought he threw it very well. I don't know that he had the same. Remember, because was Jaden Gibson playing in that game? Jaden Gibson's like the all-time leading receiver in Georgia high school football, and Gibson would have played in that game, right? Didn't he? Some of y'all from up there in North Georgia tell me that. But I thought that, those Rabun County teams for a while there that Gunner had, they were pretty talented. His last team didn't win state championship, but they were very senior-laden, had a lot of experience. Prince is still a single A. At the time we called it single A private. Now I guess we call it Class A single A, or Division I single A. We call it Division I single A. That's still a small school. Prince is a very small school. They're still really good. They got a good quarterback now in Aaron Philo, but that's just not a big roster, not a big population. Let's see what else. Taylor Russell, very funny stuff. Let's see what else. Croaking 123 says it's going to come down to, can Vandegrift fix his throwing motion? Can Beck continue to take control of the offense and be able to extend plays with his legs when he need to be? Will Gunnar just be just too good? Yeah, I mean, the same way every guy's got things to recommend about themselves, I'm sure every guy's got something he's trying to overcome. I think that's probably there as well. DMart42 says that Gunner's got a style of play that a lot of Georgia fans like. I mean, the one game I saw Gunner play in person, I mean, I will say that it was kind of cool. A very good Thomasville team, down there in South Georgia. The stadium was loud. Thomasville was blitzing on every single play. Gunner was bleeding like Rocky Balboa. Had this huge cut on his chin, bleeding like Rocky Balboa. Certainly a game like that definitely gives a lot of voice to, this is just a tough kid. This, that gamer quality. You definitely kind of, that game kind of Raven kind of did not win. And Gunner, finished his career without a state championship, something that team desperately wanted, had really kind of been setting up for, and what turned out to be the final year of Jay Belshaw there at Rabun County. But that night, Gunner Stockton definitely sort of bolstered his toughness bona fides, I guess, if you will. Let's see what else. And Paul Moon kind of echoing what I've said many times when I talked to Jake Fromm about a moment ago. The weird thing about Brock Vandegrift is, and Carson Beck was the same way in 2021, that number 3 quarterback is just sort of out of sight, out of mind. I mean, I'll tell you, I don't think we heard a word about Carson in 2021 because when you're the number 3 quarterback, you're just sort of buried. JT was the backup. Carson was number 3. I think Vandegrift would have been the scout team back then. It was Beck in that role in 2021. It was Vandegrift in that role in 2022. I'm just guessing it's sort of hard to be the number 3 quarterback. Better to be number 4 than number 3, maybe. And that's just me guessing. Let's see what else. Corey Talent says, love Bremen's games against Rabun County. He says Stockton's the real deal. Good to hear that from someone who saw him in person. Cassie Turner says quarterback 3 is like the middle child that gets forgotten. In some respects, maybe so. Taylor Russ also brings up a good point. That if there is a little hometown love for Gunner that Brock's not getting. Now, I think the Brock Vandegrift's kind of a cool name, but Gunner Stockton is just the coolest name in the world. It just sounds really, really cool. And there may be something to that. And there's a reason why movie stars change their names. Cool names make it easier for people to remember you. Gunner Stockton is just a name. That is a name. Taylor, that's actually a really good point. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment. Now, listen, I think it'd be really awesome if in the midst of all of this, Carson Beck does have something going for him the other guys don't have. It is a huge level of experience. Experience meaning that he's just been here for a good while, and that's a new offensive coordinator. But there's still something to be said for just being around the Georgia program and being confident and relaxed and at ease. And Carson may use that to step up and emerge and never look back. That's at least a possibility. Jacob O'Neill says Facebook's all over the place today. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says she's the one that messed it up. Joseph Kennedy predicts Georgia go 15-0 in 2023 and 2024. Well, if Georgia does that, which would be very hard to do, but if Georgia does that, then you pretty well, you can call this the greatest era of any college team ever if Georgia tacks on another 30 straight wins. Let's see what else. Yeah, everybody says the Facebook comments kind of wild today, which is kind of funny to see. Wendell LaRue says if it's close, Gunner will get the nod, but I expect Carson to win. Yeah, every high school coach I know, and I know a lot of them, they all kind of have the same mindset of if it's a competition for playing time in any sport, and if it's close, you take the younger guy. That's just the way that high school coaches typically operate. I don't know in this case that's the way Georgia will choose to operate or not, because Georgia's trying to win a national championship. So this is a little bit different. Like when Jake Fromm won the job in 2017, a lot of that would have been long-range thinking of, hey, if I'm Kirby Smart, I'm sort of thinking, hey, if I go with Jake now, imagine how good he can be 2 years from now. That you're doing long-range thinking. I don't know there's as much long-range thinking in a place like Georgia anymore because of the fact that Georgia's winning national championships in the present tense. So that might be the one argument against what I said a moment ago of, typically speaking, coaches like the younger coach. They like the idea of developing for the future. But Georgia, the future's the present. And so if Carson gives you the best chance of winning a national championship right now, then you probably do that, even if it's only slightly different compared to somebody who's a little bit younger. Let's see what else. Jesse Jones and Pete Williams talking about how Todd Monken might handle his first draft in Baltimore. I don't know how much say the offensive coordinator gets over who a team drafts. I also don't know that Bennett and Monken had quite the relationship necessary for a guy like Todd to stand on the table for him in Baltimore. But we'll see. We'll see. Craig Fawcett asks an important question. He says, who's going to be the other cornerback on the other side of Kamari Laster? I'd say that Dalen Everett might be the slight favorite right now. I would say that's probably the case. I think that Dalen's probably in pretty good shape here for a situation like that. Randy Hall asked, I'm going to change my name to Cruz Adams. I was talking about name change a moment ago. I mean, you got to admit, Tom Cruise is no one's ever forgetting the name Tom Cruise. And that just sounds like a cool name. Easy to remember. No one's forgetting that name. So would I change my name to B.A. Cruz? That's not too bad. Not too bad. John Paul Williams says, we definitely hear more about Gunnar Stockton than we do about Brock Vandagriff from fans and local media. I'm a bigger Vandagriff fan, but trust the coaches. I think Vandagriff is being undervalued by fans and beat writers press. You may be right about that. I don't think that Vandagriff, though, is being treated any different right now than the way in which Carson Beck was being treated in 2021. As I said before, I think there's something really weird about being the number 3 quarterback. I do. I think there's something really weird about that. And if it feels like it's kind of too quiet on the Vandagriff front, I honestly do not believe there's any – certainly there's not an attempt to suppress Vandagriff talk on the part of the media, nor is there this belief that Vandagriff can't be a very good quarterback. I genuinely think that Brock Vandagriff is as much of this a part of this competition as anybody possibly is. But I think that when you are the number 3 quarterback at a place like Georgia, you just end up not getting as much discussion as the other guys get. Now, all of this has a chance to change coming up this spring. And it is very likely, very, very likely, that Kirby Smart takes the same tact every single week for the entirety, if not just the spring, the offseason of, we think all 3 guys give us a chance to win. I mean, there's a very strong possibility that Smart doesn't do a lot to differentiate these 3 quarterbacks when he speaks publicly. But there's also at least some chance he doesn't. And, everybody, is probably of the conventional wisdom, well, the longer you drag this competition out, the more you keep all the guys in the program. And that's kind of, sort of thought to be the conventional wisdom. But in some instances, I'll admit these are rare, but in some instances, we have seen coaches kind of whittle their competition down a little bit. We have seen coaches say, hey, we had 4 guys, but these 2 are actually standing out the most. So don't judge Vandagriff on what you've heard about him over the last year. Judge what you hear about him over the course of the next 5 weeks, the next 2 months, the next however. The way in which Vandagriff is discussed, the way in which Beck is discussed, the way in which Gunner's discussed, all of that could change, and we could hear these guys for different reasons sort of talked up in a way they haven't been in the past. I am interested to hear that. Now, I'll also tell you this, and I think I may have said this on the show before. My brain is wired weird. So if Kirby says too many good things about any one quarterback, especially if it's the eventual starter, if Kirby's building that guy up too much, then my brain, wired weird the way that it is, I'm going to be left to conclude, oh gosh, this guy must not be performing very well at practice. He must need a real confidence boost because Kirby would not typically do this. Kirby's patting this guy on the back. He's taking him to SEC Media Day. He's doing all this kind of stuff. Kirby must be really trying to build this guy up to behind the scenes, get his teammates to believe in him. That's probably a weird way of looking at this, but that's the way my mind works. That if Kirby's hard on these guys, if he's out there talking about what he wants to see more from them, then in my mind I'm like, okay, well, this competition must be going pretty well because Kirby feels okay about doing this. But the moment like the good cop comes out, the moment it's, lovey-dovey Kirby, hey, we think this guy's great. At that point in time, I start to get a little nervous that maybe Kirby feels like the quarterback needs a little bit too much of a confidence boost, which, as I said before, is probably a weird way to look at this. Let's see what Brian Williamson says. If Beck gets the number one spot for the first game, he'll not be on a short leash. He cannot play bad or make a bunch. He will be on a short leash. He can't play bad or make a bunch of early mistakes. Maybe so. I mean, that's sort of the name of the game of the quarterback spot anyway, right? It's like, I can't go out there and just avoid mistakes because there's a way of avoiding mistakes that doesn't really produce a lot of positive plays for my team either. I mean, it's the name of the game for the quarterback spot, kind of living on that razor's edge of I've got to make plays, I've got to make things happen without doing something to aid the other team. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says, when do they start spring practice? It's all over. It's the 15th. Is that right? It's all over the DawgNation.com, the internet, everywhere else. I believe it's Wednesday the 15th. Spring practice and is one of those 2 days. It's the middle of next week, 14th, 15th, something like that. But, yeah, you got spring practice the one day. You got pro day the next. I think it's the 15th. Let me give you something else. But it's next week. It's middle of next week. Let's see what else. Back on YouTube for a moment. We're talking about 40 times over here. I mean, I'm definitely, a believer, in how you play the game of football. And, sometimes the 40 stuff can be overrated. I totally get all of that. Do I think that Nolan showed something pretty good about himself by how he ran? I absolutely do. I also wonder how many teams might view Nolan Smith as a potential inside linebacker. I also kind of wonder about that a little bit too. I don't know how much of a transition you make moving on to the NFL, but part of me wonders if that's the case. How about this? Scott Harris says, getting ready for his Royal Caribbean cruise first week in April. Going to be getting that ship ready for Dog Nation. Scott, that's awesome. I hope you have a great time. Glad to know you're going to be on board. Can't wait to hear how it goes from you. And, of course, it's great to have you checking in here today there as well. That's awesome. That is awesome. And, by the way, in terms of Nolan Smith, in terms of how he played, I would say that Nolan Smith played plenty fast as well. I'd say he played plenty fast. Cassie Turner says, we make her jealous with all this cruise talk. Cassie, we're going to get you on board here pretty soon. We are indeed. Alan Hampton says, I believe that Kirby Smart's going to let the new quarterback play. He's going to have confidence by then, and he'll know that he'll make mistakes. Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that's the right way to approach this, Alan. I think you're right. Chase on the subject of the Nolan Smith's strength. I mean, I think you've definitely seen Georgia kind of reemphasize, guys like Darius Smith Jr.'s example of this, kind of reemphasizing those big edge rusher, pass rusher types. Obviously that's been the kind of thing that seems like Georgia's somewhat emphasized here recently. And that's always been, one of the knocks on Nolan. But listen, I don't think you can deny the level of play that he gave Georgia over the course of the last 4 years when he was healthy. Kroger King 123 on the subject of yanking a quarterback. He says it would take a Dwan Mathis type performance to yank a guy. I mean, in the case of Dwan, Georgia was going to lose that day. And it's one thing, like if Georgia was playing like, say, Tennessee Martin in the first game of the 2020 season, obviously that year they didn't play non-conference games, but if they were playing a team like that, would they have let Dwan just sort of struggle his way through that? They would have. But if Georgia didn't make the switch to Stetson Bennett, they were going to lose the game. They were like a 30-point favorite, a 28-point favorite, something like that. They were going to lose the game if they didn't make that switch. That was a little bit of a different type situation, whereas I don't know there's any team that Georgia could lose to this year, no matter which quarterback it played. So a little bit different type of situation. But I will say this, and listen, I don't beat up on anybody. I'm not going to beat up on Dwan Mathis either. But some of the stuff you heard about Dwan, and a lot of this was sort of media leaks, but it's the kind of thing that I told you made me really nervous. You had all these people, Dwan Mathis just looks so good during practice. This, and this. Like, you don't ever hear any of that kind of stuff coming out of Georgia. The fact that you heard so much of that about Dwan Mathis immediately after Jamie Newman transferred out of the program, I just was left to believe. I'm not quite so sure this is all completely genuine. This might be an attempt to build up Dwan, make him feel good about the fact that he's about to be in a role that I'm not quite so sure he thought he was going to be in quite so quick. So it just sort of all goes to point to what a weird year 2020 was. It's a total outlier. Nothing that seemingly happened that year had any connection to future years. And if I'm an Alabama fan, that was my last national championship. That makes me pretty nervous. What else? All right, final comments. We're going to go around all three comment sections here. Chase White says, I think of Nolan Moore as a true outside linebacker covering tight ends and running backs. Could be the case. Mike Brown says, what about a Ronnie Lott-style safety position? That's kind of interesting. Spencer Clark also mentioning Arian Smith. Arian could be one of the more interesting players in this roster this year. Spencer, that's a good name to bring up, I think. For sure. All right. Back over at DawgNation.com for a moment. Scott Harris also checking in over here saying, I think after Stetson, UGA fans will think the way the starting quarterback job is through the scout team. It could very well be the case. Stetson kind of being the thing there on that. And I also think the Stetson story ought to be, the kind of thing that sort of leaves you open for possible surprises. I think that's true there as well. Raleigh Dog says 2 plays into Dwan's career at Georgia. He says didn't run hard for first down, got chewed out, ran for first down and got hammered in his head. Very shaky after that play. Could have been the case. Unfortunately, I think for Dwan, he was just sort of thrust into a situation he wasn't ready for. It was just a weird year. Just a very, very weird year. I mean, I'll never know the full extent of the Jamie Newman story. I'll never know. We'll probably never know exactly what all that really was. But it set up a pretty unfortunate situation for UGA, obviously. Randy Hall says, on a comparative subject, how would you compare Mike Matthews to Caleb Downs, talking about comparative competition? So I think that Mike Matthews is the most exciting player in Georgia high school football right now. I don't know that I thought that Downs was the most exciting, even though he was a dominant offensive and defensive player. I don't know that I necessarily used the word exciting for Caleb Downs. I think that Mike Matthews is a highlight film. And I don't get the impression Matthews is coming to Georgia right now, which I obviously wish wasn't true, but that's not going to stop me from saying Mike Matthews is a very, very exciting, thrilling high school player. I believe he's more of an offensive player than a defensive player. That's another thing that makes him somewhat different than Caleb Downs. Downs was, even though he was probably Mill Creek's best offensive player, he was obviously, an all-time safety at the high school level. So from that standpoint, that may be the biggest difference is that Matthews is, to me, more of a thrilling offensive player, whereas Downs, even though he was great on offense, was always sort of set to be that defensive guy. Caleb Downs proved himself to be the kind of guy that could win games at the high school level. I don't know that Matthews has necessarily proved that at Parkview. But I think that Matthews is the most exciting player in our state right now. I do. Let's see what else. Raleigh Dog says, I think that Jamie Newman wasn't getting Monken's system. JT Daniels was. Newman didn't want to lose the job, so he opted out, in my opinion. Maybe that's the case, but when that story was first floated back then, it seemed like very conventional. I should say it seemed very convenient. It ultimately doesn't matter. Georgia's won 1,000 national championships. Is all of this. So all of this is just sort of water under the bridge now. But the idea that Newman left because Daniels was so much better, that just seems like really convenient narrative to me, given the fact that I'm not quite so sure how much JT Daniels even practicing. He wasn't cleared to play. How much was he really practicing? Like, how good could he have been in practice if he wasn't cleared to play? It's one of those things I'm sort of curious about, but ultimately probably doesn't matter all that much. Senior Dog would like to see a little bit of a pare down in terms of the number of running backs that Georgia plays. It'll be interesting to see how that might change this year. You still got Del McGee leading the way as the running backs coach, but you do have a different offensive coordinator. I think that could have some impact on the rushing attack this year. Let's see what else. Pete Williams talking about some of the physical health challenges that DeJuan dealt with, and those were significant, Pete. You are right about that. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Yeah, I don't know about the TV coverage for Pro Day. Georgia will probably have some of that. In the past, they've put a lot of this in the NFL Network, but I don't know how much that'll be true this year. All right, let's see what else. Anything else? Winfred Steinspring talking about the effect that the weak schedule will have on the quarterback competition. I mean, if you want to play these guys into the year, because keep in mind, when Kirby was at Alabama, not to say that Georgia needs to do things like Alabama did it, but Nick Saban frequently took quarterback competitions into the season, and oftentimes he would have a surprising winner. I don't think anybody expected Blake Sims to emerge as the Bama starter in 2014, and he did. They didn't win the national championship that year. They did go to the college football playoff, and Kirby was still on the staff then. That, it's at least possible that Kirby wants this competition to go into the spring, or I should say into the season. But if Carson truly is the best, the guy that we would say starts as the most likely to win it because he's the most experienced, if he truly is the best of the bunch, and if he truly is destined to be the starter, then Georgia, I would say, is better served by preparing him for the season. They are, going through the motions in a competition that might not actually be all that competitive, if that were the case. So we'll see. We'll see. All right, we're going to go for now. Y'all check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com. Hawks are a mess. You can read about that. Braves finishing touches on spring training. You can read about that. Is the NHL actually going to come to Atlanta again? You can probably read about that there too. I'll tell you, here's another thing you can read for sure. So we talked about this actually on the show at one point in time. There was a legislative pathway, it seemed, for sports betting legalization in Georgia, and it didn't happen. Yesterday was what they call crossover day with the state legislature, the General Assembly, and the Senate had a couple of bills, and they let those die. The House didn't even bring it up, I don't think. So ultimately, this didn't happen. And one of these days, I'd sort of be curious to kind of hear about why. I mean, I think there's arguments to be made on both sides, maybe. But I was a little bit interested to hear there would have been all kinds of optimism about this at one point in time. This time it's going to be different, and it turns out it wasn't any different than it's ever been before. So there you go. Also, what about Lamar Jackson? What's going to happen with Lamar Jackson there in the Ravens? How could this potentially impact the Falcons? You can read about that. And on a more serious note there as well, so the Stockton Coliseum thing, apparently that's going to be like months. I guess a little piece of debris has fallen down, which out of an abundance of caution, they're going to kind of close the whole thing. So you're talking about spring commencement, all this kind of stuff moved out of Stockton Coliseum, and it could be several months again before anyone's using the Stegosaurus for anything. So you can read more about that online, ajc.com as well. We got to go for now. Thanks for being here. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Also check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them for that, including air conditioning units. It's been warm now. It's going to be even warmer later on. So go ahead and get that air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. $99 is all it costs you. You can find out more at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll talk to you then.